Welcome to the Common Time Podcast, a show designed to give music educators practical, inspiring ideas for you and your program. Each week, we sit down with world-class educators, composers, and conductors to talk about teaching, leadership, and building programs that thrive without burning yourself out.
So whether you're a band, orchestra, or choir director, our goal is simple: to help you grow and stay inspired and remember why you fell in love with teaching music in the first place.
This is season 4, and we're diving even deeper. More real conversations, more actionable takeaways, and more voices shaping the future of music education. Let's get into the episode. Our guest today is Professor Michael Haithcock. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
We're so happy to have you on the podcast. So Professor Haithcock is the Arthur F. Thurnau Professor Emeritus of Music and former Director of Bands of the University of Michigan. And we could not be more delighted to share his expertise and knowledge and just ask some questions. So John, why don't you get us started?
Thanks, David. Hi, Michael. It's always good to see you. Thanks for being here. So I'm just going to start off right away by asking about your, just because you've had such a distinguished career as a conductor and as a teacher and as a mentor to many people, including myself. So looking back, what kind of moments or decisions kind of shaped who you've become on the podium?
Well, how many weeks do we have?
Yeah, that's a broad question, but
I appreciate the compliment of having a distinguished career. I think, one of the things I tried to do in all the roles that you mentioned is be the same person off the podium that I was on the podium. Same person in the hallways. It doesn't mean that everyone was always happy with me or whatever, but just having a consistency of approach, being direct, being honest, just not having to look over your shoulder, wondering why you did that last time and this time, and that sort of thing. And I think the core values of that came from my parents and grandparents. I'm the first generation college student. My grandparents were born in the late 1800s. My parents were born in the 30s, right after the Depression. And there was a sense of, if you're going to do it right. In my upbringing, there was, we weren't kidding around with whatever it was, at least to the best of our abilities. And my abilities in certain high school subjects were much concerned to my parents. But I think that work ethic that my grandparents who came from farms into the cotton mills of North Carolina to work, really transferred both genetically perhaps, but also in terms of my observations growing up, because I've always felt the need to fulfill my commitments and be sure that I was 100% prepared and ready to be of service. I think my parents really wanted me to be a church musician, and I took piano for 12 years, all through from grade 1 to 12. I took organ for the last 4 years. I had a church job my last 2 years at a small Methodist church where I played the organ and did the choir, and that pretty much convinced me that I did not want to do that. I was always enamored with the high school band, and I studied. I learned to play the saxophone, but I studied, flute, clarinet, horn, and baritone in the summer, at summer band programs. And my goal in life was to replace my high school band director when he retired. Goal my 91-year-old mother still says that I didn't quite achieve. But I think like a lot of kids, my parents and I went in to talk to my high school band director, and my dad said, well, he wants to be a band director and follow in your footsteps, and what should we do? And he didn't blink. He said, you should go to East Carolina University. So I did. It's the only school I applied to, and I got in, and I had the good fortune of having some really great teachers. I had a conducting teacher who was a Michigan graduate, a student of Elizabeth H. Green, who played principal trombone in the symphony band under Ravelli. Was a classmate of H. Robert Reynolds. And he made sure I was really well schooled in the ways of Ma Green. The saxophone teacher was a young whippersnapper named Jim Hulick, who was probably the highest artistic influence on my life. And we remain good friends today, 60 years later.
That's wonderful.
He's just now retiring from teaching in his early 80s.
That's great.
And then the band director there, Herbert Carter, was very influential. He ran what was called the Symphonic Wind Ensemble, which is kind of what Northwestern does, where it's a small band, not so much rotation of parts and that sort of stuff. But, I was going to college between 1972 and 1976, and he was playing Persichetti and Husa and Schumann, those kind of pieces. We did play Lincolnshire Posy, but, he was playing what at the time was, new.
Yeah.
And we didn't do very many transcriptions, although we did, we did Candide, we did Festive Overture, but I got a sense between the saxophone repertoire needing to grow and the modeling of Herbert Carter in the wind ensemble that this pursuit of repertoire was something that really interested me. So I was going to graduate, and I went back to school after Christmas in early 1976, and I went in and told Mr. Hulick, hey, I've decided to stay at East Carolina and get my master's degree because I can earn another $1,000 a year. This is when starting teaching salaries were $9,000, right?
Oh,
and I could do it in the summer and a year. If you do the math, John, $10,000 in today's dollars works out to the mid 50s.
Yeah. Okay.
So you
got it.
wasn't quite as poverty
You
level.
hear it, just like
yeah.
$9,000. Wow.
You can buy a loaf of bread for a nickel. So
Oh,
we're going way back. So I told him this, and he didn't say much. And then the next day, after the wind ensemble rehearsal, we rehearsed 4 days a week for an hour and 10 minutes. On the way out of the rehearsal, Herbert Carter came over to me and said, I want you to come to my office. So I'm thinking, well, what have I done? I don't think I've had a bad rehearsal or whatever. So I went in there, and there's Hulick, and there's Bob Hoss, the orchestra conductor, who was the conducting teacher. And they basically said to me, you can't stay here. You've got everything out of the school you can get. You need to go someplace else. And Carter handed me a slip of paper that was an assistantship advertisement to Baylor University. And he pointed to the name on the assistantship advertisement. He said, this guy, Richard Floyd, had a fantastic high school band. His high school band played the Dahl Sinfonietta. And he said, you go down there and study with this guy for 2 years, and you can have any high school job in North Carolina you want. So I called the phone number. The assistantship was still open. I applied, never been to Waco, didn't even really realize Baylor was a Baptist school, and wound up getting the assistantship and moving to Texas to stay 2 years. It took me 25 years to graduate. So, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think all those little dominoes fell in such a way that my path is probably not repeatable. In some ways, everyone experiences certain kind of mentors that help propel them along the way.
Yeah.
But when I was the church job stuff, I didn't want to do that for profession, but I learned a lot from it. And I did it when I was in college, and I did it for a couple of years, my first few years on the faculty at Baylor, because you have to learn how to work with people, and you have to learn how to, deal with a structure. You have to learn how to rehearse ahead. You can't just rehearse for the moment, and you have to learn what you can actually accomplish and what that tenor is never going to sing in tune. So you kind of have to figure all this stuff out. And I think those lessons, proved to be extremely valuable to me as I went through my 45 years of college teaching.
And that's a wonderful trajectory. Like just seeing, I've never heard all of those pieces put together. I've known where you've been in some of the background, but not fully. So I appreciate the insight. And it kind of makes me think about where I was thinking this next question could go. Because you mentioned that part of your mentorship was seeing, how you could help these other individuals, but your legacy largely lives in your students now. They're out doing various things and being quite successful from Baylor to the University of Michigan. So you just mentioned value. So when you think about your work with young conductors and younger musicians, what are the values that mattered most to you beyond the notes and the rhythms and stuff we're going to get out of the way, of course, but holistically?
Yeah. I mean, John's heard me say some of these things numerous times. I didn't know this quote early in my career, but I keep coming back to it as a mantra for what I tried to do. And that is the Maya Angelou quote. They may remember what you did, they may remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And I had experiences as an undergraduate student, and that made me feel awful, and I had those that made me feel great. And it wasn't so much about how successful I was in the class or whether I thought the teacher liked me. It was just the way the instruction was delivered and how I could follow the what needed to be done and get a grip, so to speak, on what the curriculum was.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I became the first ever assistant director of bands at Baylor after those 2 years of master's degree, my fear of failure was kind of off the charts because I had no business in that job. I mean, they offered me the job because I was cheap and available, and they were going to do it for 1 year, and then 1 year turned into 4. But I had just been a grad student there, so half the students knew me as this grad student. So how was I going to position myself as all of a sudden this new faculty member?
All right.
And I think that's really where I started to tie together the values that I had learned from my family, the modeling I'd had from these wonderful teachers in high school and also at ECU, and the church experience, how to work with people. And so, if I try to nutshell it, I think I developed a concept I called the cycle of trust. And I would give this speech to the symphony band every semester because to me it was like a contract or a covenant or a deal, whatever you want to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted them to know that the most important thing to me was that I got to know them as people. I didn't want to walk down the hall and say, "Oh, you played third clarinet." I wanted to be able to call somebody by name, know why they came to Michigan. I knew that at Baylor because I was so heavily involved in summer camps and recruiting. But when I came to Michigan, I didn't know that at all. So I decided to do this with the entire 76-piece band. At the first rehearsal, I made this announcement, and over the next 3 weeks, I met everybody individually because I wanted to get to know them as people. Because I think in all these relationships I've been describing, it was the personal touch, if you will, that gave me confidence and trust in the advice I was getting and the instruction I was getting, and knowing that I could go to these mentors at any time and seek help as I needed it. So this cycle of trust concept, to me, the most important thing was, I know you as a person, I care about you as a person, and then I will do anything I can to help you. No stone left unturned. I will attend your recital. I will write your letters of recommendation. If you want me to hear you play for an audition, I will do it. Any way in which I could help people, because that's the way people treated me. And I was really busy, but I never wanted to give the impression that I was too busy to be of service. I think that's a vibe that a lot of conductors give off, and it's not something that is part of my makeup. I also understood, largely because of my children, that their time and their talent was a significant asset. And so one of the best gifts you can give to someone is the way you spend time with them. And the other gift you can give them related to time is not waste it.
Right.
So using every minute of every rehearsal professionally, and with a clear plan, something I called ego vision, being able to go from, step one through the end product, knowing exactly how you're going to spend the time. In addition to trust, there's a respect that develops from that. I respect you, you respect me, we respect the process. You come in every day, you know that there's a plan. It's much easier to prepare when you know what the plan is than if you just come in with this open-ended, well, we're going to do something for 2 hours. And, I think all those things I tried to put into practice. I'm talking about the symphony band right now, but I also tried to put those things into practice with the graduate conducting students, with my faculty colleagues, so that, it wasn't, I only care about the symphony band. I spent an enormous amount of time on other things. administratively and pedagogically. And, again, who you are is across the board, people see. And I wanted there to be, a consistency of that people could trust me no matter what the role. And, it's interesting, all these students of mine and, conducting students to go out and teach, they tell me in their first days on the job, hey, I did these getting to know you appointments and the students can't believe it.
Right.
So I think, again, that the respect and trust that the approach garnered opens the door for so many things. And that was, if you're gonna push somebody like in a graduate conducting studio, I always use the term best possible. Well, that's good, but it's not as good as it can be, and it's not as good as you can do. And I often said to people, if I stop asking you to improve, then I've given up. And I didn't have people give up on me, and that still resonates to me after all these years. So, I mean, I've gone on a bit, David. I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, you absolutely have. Those little things, it's interesting. My doctor was Steve Davis, who was at Michigan for a time.
5 years.
And we would have DOB 101 talks as well. And I know where those come from.
Yep.
And in one of those, I do remember him talking about those meetings with students. And I did that every time following that. And it made a huge difference of setting up at the beginning of the semester. When I first got to the University of Houston, the first thing I did is I have to get to know these students. I've been out of Texas for a decade.
Sure.
It's different. And it was very impactful. And it came from, I'm certain that it came from a DOB 101 talk, probably 10 or 15 years prior with Steve Davis. So it all resonates with me for sure.
I still have all of the DOB 101 emails, Mike, that you sent me, but I'm going to change topics just a tad bit.
Okay.
You are known for everything that you just said, but also specifically your knowledge of the repertoire, I think, is unparalleled in our profession from anyone that I've ever known. And because we taught together for 15 years, I have seen you think about and create thoughtful, cohesive concert programs. And I always respected that at the highest level. So my question for you is, do you have advice for anyone about, as they shape a program, what questions should guide their choices emotionally, musically, educationally? I mean, all the things. Do you have any advice, or how did you do it, and how do you teach others to also do that?
Well, I think I learned a lot about programming by going to a lot of concerts. I went to a lot of concerts at Baylor of the orchestra, of the choirs, of my faculty colleagues, and student recitals. And here in Ann Arbor, there is an embarrassment of riches of concerts you can attend. And I think I just, over the years, sorted out what made a concert enjoyable to me. So if I go hear the Chamber Orchestra of Europe in December and it's an all Brahms concert, that's fabulous. It's all Brahms. It's, the pick of the litter, if you will. If you're putting together a middle school band concert, then, really what do students need to learn as opposed to what do the students like? And the balance in that, I think, is really crucial in the lower grades. My wife taught piano for years, and you would hear these kids come in and struggle with a Bach invention, and then they would, get to play a show tune or some pop tune that, they had learned. And again, the balance of that. So when I tried to put together programs, both at Baylor and the Michigan Symphony Band programs, to me, it was always about the balance. So I remember doing Music for Prague at a Texas Music Educators Association concert in 1995. Well, that's the band crowd knows that piece. But I also did Lincolnshire Posy and the Torino La Procession. So there was a wide variety of sounds. And that was one of the things I learned from going to choral concerts, is that, a choir is a choir is a choir, but how do you program in such a way so that the choir doesn't sound the same piece after piece after piece? And I think one of the shortcomings for many band concerts is that the pieces sound too much the same uh, because they're, cut from the same cloth. So as different as Persichetti and William Schumann are, they're really in a way cut from the same cloth. So, if John Mackey and Steve Bryant, they are different, yes, but they are also cut from the same cloth. So how do you balance what the audience is going to experience? And both at Baylor and at Michigan, I did that by using the historical repertoire and rotating players, doing things one on a part as well as a full ensemble. So you have the complete range of music history at your disposal. And, I didn't want an audience at Michigan to feel that we were only going to do small stuff because of the tradition of the band. So when I came to Michigan, I was pretty upfront. I'm going to merge the Eastman Wind Ensemble tradition with the University of Michigan Symphony Band tradition. And that's what we wound up doing. I called it 8 to 80. So we could do a full band piece with 80 players, which is still 44 people less than Ravelli used in his last years. But, in today's world, that's a full band. So I just think constantly thinking about the balance. And I always wanted people to feel welcomed to the concert, not affronted at the beginning of the concert. And I always wanted to have people feel they were leaving at the end with something that made them want to come back, not wonder what that was. And they are depending on the person and the person's musical experience, that can mean different things. But I use this metaphor I called Maud and Mabel. Those are the people that come in off the street free because they've lived in Ann Arbor for years and they've been coming to symphony band concerts for years. Some of the people I would talk to, I came to symphony band concerts when I was a kid because my parents had played for William D. Ravelli, or my parents came to Ravelli concerts, et cetera, et cetera. So I think all those things kind of go into the mix. Now, in terms of, and I'll give you an example. Music for Prague, I mentioned before, is a piece I love. And I think it's a masterpiece in any genre. And I did it on my first concert at Michigan because it was a piece that Bob had not done in years. And there was a connection with Michigan and Husa. So I got Carell to come, and Ravelli had actually been quite a champion of Prague at a time when Ravelli did no other new music. So, as a matter of fact, he did it with the Texas All-State once, I think the early 70s. And, that was a huge deal. So that was the last piece on the concert. Great, worked, because Carell gave a little speech and tied it all together with his experience with Husa and Bob and myself, and it was really a wonderful thing. But I don't think every concert where you do Prague has to be the last piece. If you think about it emotionally, you might think about it in a way, but as the Cold War ebbed, that emotional context wasn't always quite the same. So the last couple of times I did it at the end of the first half and gave the intermission space for people to absorb it emotionally, or, what react to it however they wanted to react to it. You could never do that with Circus Maximus. If I are done, that's going to end the concert.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, you're done.
And even a piece like Maslanka Fourth Symphony. I mean, it's you just don't follow that up. But I think you have to think about all those. You have to think about all the ramifications of that. And I always wanted my studio colleagues to feel that when they came to a symphony band concert, they actually got to hear their students, not just in the total, but is there a place on the concert where this section is featured? Is there a solo for this? And you can't make that happen all across the board, but you have to do it in such a way where people feel like their students are being, entrusted with serious material. It's much easier to do that in the orchestra. It's getting increasingly easier to do that in the band world because thanks to Copland and Dahl and Schwantner and Kohlgrass, there's so much less 2D writing now all the time. But I think those are all things that I wanted to think about. And we have this incredible composition faculty tradition at Michigan. And so I would think about, well, is this piece going to pass muster with those people's ears? It's not that they're going to like every piece, but can they respect the composer's output, or they just feel this is a band throwaway? So that's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And I spent an incredible amount of time building programs. At Baylor, I had a different challenge, which was, what are the strengths of the ensemble? Who's going to be there next year when I'm trying to plan this? But I think one of the things that I learned to do was to plan holistically. I mentioned the phrase eagle vision earlier. I learned how to plan the year, lay out what I called anchor pieces, like the greatest pieces in the repertoire. Is it the Mozart Serenade? Is it Lincolnshire Posy? Is it Prague? Is it Hindeman Symphony? Whatever. Spread them out over 4 years, spread them out within a year, program around them. I really don't like this fad of themes. I see a lot of programs where people back themselves into corners trying to make a theme work. There are occasions where I thought a theme was appropriate, like honoring the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination in 2018. Honoring some, anniversary of the University of Michigan. I mean, there's all different kind of ways in which a situation can make a theme work. But if an orchestra says Dudamel does Russia, well, there's a whole lot of things to choose from. And sometimes if you look at orchestra programs, they have a masthead of a theme, and you look underneath it and it's, really. So I think there's been a lot of trying to copycat orchestra publicities in a way that I think sometimes undermines the student experience. I mean, it's certainly possible to craft thematic concerts, but whenever I used a theme, the theme always came from the music I decided to select. And mostly it was for the poster. I didn't necessarily expect an audience member to go, "Oh,
I get it."
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
They're doing Through the Looking Glass. Let me go.
Oh, that's funny. Just digging in just slightly more on that, because you mentioned at Baylor, like you were looking at sort of the needs of the changing ensemble as well. So I'm curious, because a lot of our audience is middle school, high school directors. We have people to listen at the college level, but in terms of programming, how do you think about and how would you advise someone in terms of balancing the artistic ambition that you might have for the ensemble with the actual developmental needs of the ensemble?
Yeah. Well, again, I think you hit on the word balance, which I think is key. Many years ago, Don Hunsberger published an article in The Instrumentalist that was about a 4-year curriculum. And I don't remember the pieces, but he was like, these are pieces that every high school wind band could play. It wasn't outrageously difficult. It was like kind of meat and potatoes, and you could add to it with other things. But then his point was, if you cycle through these meat and potatoes, then you can add and subtract, but you're not reinventing the wheel every generation of students, because
right.
My kids went through the 8th grade and they read the same book 4 years apart. So the teacher's expertise was, apparent. And I think always chasing the new leads to some problems in the way that you're thinking about it. So that's one aspect of the way I'd answer the question. The other thing is, I think you have to sit down and think pretty heavily, if you can, about the strengths and weaknesses of your ensemble. So if you're doing an 8th grade band, what are these people who are coming into your band played? What does the 9th grade and 10th grade look like ahead of them? What do they need to go? So focusing on growing them where it serves the overall program of the cluster, if you will, to use a Texas term, I think is really important if you're in one of those stepping stone positions. The methodology of how you teach notes and rhythms and all that sort of stuff, that's kind of out of the purview of this question, although
sure.
that fits in. But I think that if you if you don't have a vision for what the student should be doing at the end of that 8th grade year, then you're just sort of shooting blind.
Right.
And I think with that vision, I mentioned the term eagle vision before, if you can look above the year at like an eagle soaring rather than a chicken, poking, at the next level, then you have a much better chance to actually think through the thing. So maybe you have 3 or 4 different pieces that have the same concepts in mind. And maybe you pass some of them out and they don't work, you pass others out, but you have an idea of what it is these pieces are going to teach the students. And, I think that seems so logical to me. I'm just surprised that more people don't seem to think that way. I never taught in the public schools, and I have not had a lot of experience with it in recent years. But, anecdotally, what I hear from people in terms of how they're thinking about programming and what they're putting in front of their students, I think those are things that could help. And if I was the head high school band director, depending on how the relationship with the principal and the supervisor and all that, I would certainly want to have a backward-facing view of what was being programmed. If you want to play, slow and pretty Irish tune, are you playing air for band, even though it's very old? Are you playing other pieces, that prepare at an appropriate grade level, the concepts of tone production, blend and balance, intonation, and all that sort of stuff? If you want to play Fast and Furious for band, then are you developing the technique along the way, not just to play Fast and Furious with 6 months of rehearsal, but developing the actual technical skill through whatever you're doing to be able to do that at the high school level. And I think one last thing I would say, and this is particularly true at the upper levels of high school, if every rehearsal students feel like they're pushing the rock up the mountain to get these pieces that are really, really hard learned, that's really a tough sell, I think. I would go into some band halls in Texas and hear somebody say, okay, you guys put your horns up for 20 minutes and do your homework. I'm going to work over here with the clarinets for whatever. And yeah, the clarinets needed it, but is that a good use of everybody's time? And, maybe in the kids' view it is because they got to do their homework. But I just think sometimes I think you used the word artistic ambition.
Right.
The artistic ambition gets, people get ahead of their skis. I went to work with the high school band near the end of my time at Baylor, and their repertoire was the Marchman Symphonic Metamorphosis and Bells for Stokowski by Michael Daugherty. No, wait, it wasn't that. That wasn't written yet. It was Niagara Falls.
Okay.
And they had 2 horns. So that to me is a classic example of ambition getting ahead of the skis.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. You mentioned that Hunsberger article. I've not read that, but that concept has percolated in my mind since my doctorate, and having to do 4-year programming. The project was 4 years of programming. What does that look like for you? And picking what are your anchor pieces and going through and building programs around those and deciding what it is. And this is obviously an imaginary ensemble. So I didn't know the ensemble yet, but just in my mind thinking through like, how would I think about this?
Yeah.
And you're right. I don't see that happening in public education really at all. You kind of program toward a festival, and then you switch gears to outside, and then you do that again at the end of the year, but not thinking holistically about what the curriculum looks like. And even to your point, within a cluster, what does it look like from 6th grade through 12th grade?
And it's important for anybody listening to think about it. This should be done even at the middle school level. At the cluster where I used to teach, we used to kind of think like this. Back at the time, I had them for 3 years. What are the pieces that I am expected to be able to prepare the students to go to the high school experience? The anchor pieces, we didn't call them that at the time, but that's exactly what it is. Just trying to make sure that we pick the pieces that the students should know. We were able to prepare those skills by teaching other pieces in a very diligent way. So for anybody listening, this is possible. I mean, this is possible even in a small school setting, in a large school setting, at the middle school, high school, college level. It is so important.
Yeah.
So,
David, there were two things that I required every graduate student to go through in addition to the recitals and all that sort of stuff, but the curricular components. And one was a 4-year programming project, and their assignment was to program 4 years of concerts for the Michigan Symphony Band, and they had to produce a top 50 list, which they had to sprinkle through that, and they would submit programs, and they had to send a rehearsal model. So my instruction was, if a piece is 5 minutes long, you can use 12 to 15 minutes. If a piece is 20 minutes long, you can use 40 minutes, unless you can tell me that the piece has repetition, that sort of thing. Because I think what often happens with programming is that people stack pieces together without any clue how they're going to rehearse it.
Right.
Start at the top, go to the problems, then you work your way through it. And usually the burden for that, whether it's in college or 8th grade, falls on the student. And so the rehearsal model, to me, I would see these rehearsal models and I would say, there's no way this can work. And if you have Winds of McGwall and Schwantner Mountains Rising Nowhere on the same concert, the brass will run over you in the parking lot.
Yeah.
If the percussion don't get to you first, because they have to move all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you don't allow any time for that in the rehearsal. And it was, these are doctoral students, smart people. They would go, oh, yeah. So, I would go through every program like that with a fine tooth comb. And I would sometimes say, this piece is not a symphony band piece. It might be, for a lesser ensemble, but, I use that process as a way of teaching wind literature, because the way to learn wind literature is not through a chronological investigation anymore, because you have this enormous set of resources that are available to you on the internet. So curiosity and willing to spend the time to explore is the key to growing your repertoire knowledge. And I think that's another thing that's missing at some levels of programming. I heard So Much So's band play this at festival last year. I'm going to do it this year. That sometimes works, but do you really think through that at a depth of appreciation for what you're asking your students to do, or do you just do it because you thought the piece would fit?
Right.
And I realize that there's a lot of gray area here that I'm juxtaposing as bookends, but I think that's it's all part and parcel to providing your students the best experience. And I don't think I ever had anyone say this to me when I was a student, but I felt like my faculty members served me as a student. I didn't serve them. So one of the mantras I tried to use at Michigan and at Baylor and implore my graduate students who were going to go out and do things is, your job is to serve the students. If you do that, you serve the institution. If you start getting the students to serve you, or trying to get the institution to serve you, the wheels will come off fairly quickly.
So, couldn't agree more with that. So, specifically, I'd like to change topics slightly to talk about Lincolnshire Posy, which is a piece that I don't think anyone has a better knowledge of than you. So, what first drew you to the piece, and then also what keeps you wanting to go even deeper into it?
Well, I think there are a lot of people, John, that would argue with you about the knowledge statement of Lincolnshire. I think there's a lot of different people who know Lincolnshire incredibly well. I played Lincolnshire in college, and that was my first exposure to Grainger. And I loved the harmonies. I loved the orchestration. I don't remember anything about the performance. I just remember it was really good. And I, like a lot of people in that vintage, had Eastman Wind Ensemble recordings. And Eastman Wind Ensemble and Netherlands Wind Ensemble were the only two recordings you could get. I mean, unless it was a vanity CD put out by Crest Records or Mark or something. So I always felt drawn to the piece, and as a saxophone player, the way he used the saxophones was appealing. So when I had my, start at Baylor, I did the piece a few times and always felt, the challenges of getting it played well. And then I was going to do it in 1995 at TMEA, and I'm going to pause there and back up. So in 1985, I went to the Herbert Blomstedt Orchestral Conducting Institute, and Blomstedt was just about to take over as the conductor of the San Francisco Symphony. He had this month-long thing at a Seventh-day Adventist college in Loma Linda, California. And, it was a conducting workshop, but it was also a deep dive into how someone who's that level of professional conductor looks at scores. And, I had good theory chops, thanks to East Carolina. I had good lessons from Dick Floyd about how to study scores and particularly pedagogically. And I had been to workshops with Don Hunsberger and Bob Reynolds early in my career where they talked about various methodologies for score study. But this guy Blomstedt came in and would take these, like Beethoven Fourth Symphony, and he would take it apart like the composer. I mean, he talked about how Beethoven did, what he did, and why he did it. And so those three questions, how, what, why, became sort of a curiosity churning point for me. And so mainly, I increasingly got comfortable with the analytical skills of what is the chords, what's this, that, and the other. But the why would a composer do something? It became an increasingly curious thing with me. So I'm getting ready to do Lincolnshire Posy at TMEA. I think it might have been the third or fourth time I'd done it. And I'd kind of gotten over the meter changes. And, I knew all this and all that. I wasn't scared of it like I was the first time I did it. And, we had Fennell come to Baylor. And I remember talking to him at length, at great length at my house one night about his interactions with Grainger and all that sort of stuff. And just a few things he said prompted my curiosity about the stories. And in my opinion, if you look at the score, he says in his notes that he used these tunes to keep alive the folk songs and all those who sang them, which, yes, I get that. But if you look at the stories, there is real literary merit in the stories. And I begin to ask myself, well, why does he do the opening of the first movement this way? Is in the second movement, is it, verse, chorus, verse, no chorus? Is it verse? I mean, what is it here? And you can go through every movement and sort of ask yourself the questions. How is this different than Molly on the Shore? How is this different than, the other folk song short burst he did in other places? And I started by going over to a friend of mine who taught medieval literature in the English department at Baylor and asking questions about these folk song stories, the printed words, which I had gotten somehow along the way. And the guy said to me, yeah, this is classic medieval literature. You got to remember, these people didn't read and write. They didn't have a recording device. So this oral tradition. And if you look at the first verse of every story, it tells you who, what, when, and where. It was down in the valley, a fair maid did dwell. She lived with her uncle. They all knew her well, etc. So, I started looking at those stories and then going through the verses and going, well, that's interesting. Well, wait a minute. And so I came to the point of view, and this is something that I really go back to the Blomstedt thing. Blomstedt's big thing was you ask the questions why, because that guides you to make an interpretive, subjective decision. You can objectively identify what, and you can objectively identify whether it's right and wrong. But the path to an interpretation is asking yourself why. Why must it sound like this? Why would the composer do it? Why do you want this certain expression? And that why question loomed very large. So, I came up with a schematic of how I felt Grainger had told the stories. And if you go back to the first movement, 'twas on the Monday morning before the break of day. Well, it's three, it's a metaphor. How many musketeers were there?
Yeah, three.
But really there were four, but the story is three, right?
Right.
And so is the candy bar. So he takes the tune, and everybody's pitch is called Renaissance planing. Everybody is playing the melody, and it just creates the chords. So the chords aren't the deal. It's the tune in three different places representing the metaphorical nautical figure of three. Yeah. So you just go, and then, measure 32, it changes, and there's church harmony underneath because the woman in the story is saying, William, 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 I want you to marry me. There's two places in the entire piece that uses church harmony. I mean, there's all these things that to me just became so obvious. So I decided, what the hell? Can I say that on the podcast? Yeah. What the hell? I'm gonna present this. I'm gonna see if I can present these ideas at Midwest. So I did the routine of applying to present a clinic thing, and they put me in a small room about the size of a phone booth, and I had a piano, and I worked through some of these things, and there was surprisingly few people, but some of the people that were there were very important. They were directors of bands at big schools who came up to me and was like, I've done that piece for years. I never thought about this stuff. One person came up and said, you're crazy. This is an instrumental piece. There's nothing vocal about this. Doesn't really matter. I think, what I tried to do with the handout I created for Midwest, and I've used many times since, is not to say this is the only way to look at Lincolnshire Posy, but to say this is a way, it is a point of view. And you have to find a way in your score study to get past the analytical notion of what did the composer do and get to the real point of art, which is why did the composer do that? Why does it need to sound this way? And so I've used Lincolnshire Posy in numerous workshops because people who don't have a band that can play Lincolnshire Posy usually know Lincolnshire Posy. Yeah. People who do have a band that can play Lincolnshire Posy sometimes haven't thought about these things. So it's just an easy vehicle because of the knowledge of the piece, but also because, in my judgment, things are so blatantly obvious when you get down to the level that I'm talking about, that it's a good way of making the point about the point of view. I will say that I did a performance in 2007 here of Dionysiacs, and it was for the CBDA National Conference. Later that summer, I had somebody come up to me at a workshop, a student at the workshop, and say, my teacher told me that you did a performance of Dionysiacs in CBDA in Ann Arbor that messed with the traditional band interpretation of Dionysiacs, and I'd like to know under what authority you did that. So,
okay.
In one of my better moments, I said, the score, and walked off. Because I didn't want to get any deeper into this, right?
Yeah, don't get into the weeds, yeah.
Yeah. But I think, one of the problems that we often have in the band area, which is not the case in the orchestra world, is that I played it like this. I listened to the North Texas recording like this. I listened to that on my way to work. That's how I conducted, and it has nothing to do with the quality of those performances. It's that you're doing somebody else's performance. And if you talk to people about, John may be too, we're going to hear the Chicago Symphony on Monday night play Beethoven 7. Well, you can start a bar fight over tempos in Beethoven pretty fast.
He probably did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he certainly was at the bar, but whether or not they thought about it or not. But, you people get all worked up over, anything that's just not, standard operating procedure, which I just find to be so disappointing. So one of the things I've really tried to hammer with all of my graduate conducting students is, yeah, you got to fix things, you got to fix the problems, but what do you have to say? And why do you want it to feel this way? And can you show that? Can you express that gesturally? Because to me, the gesture and the answer to the why questions are inextricably linked.
Mm-hmm. As you uncovered more, through your study about Grainger and the folk song singers that are underneath Lincolnshire Posy, did that affect the way you rehearsed and presented that to your students?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you've got the quartet to start the opening of movement 3, why the hell would he do that to us? We're in those octaves, we're in this canon.
Yeah.
And what it is a metaphor for something that cannot be resolved. Because you have the people who are starving that need to poach to feed their family, and you have the people who are the protectors of the land who have to, fend off the poachers, and that's how they get paid to feed their family. So there's this conflict. In fact, the first 3 songs are about moral conflict. If you look at the stories, the first 3 songs are about moral conflict. The last 3 songs are about person to person conflict. So I think Grainger sets up, this conundrum by the way he uses the canon at the beginning and the end of movement 3, because there's no resolution. The only movement that ends with a happy ending is movement 6.
Right.
So
you're right.
There's so many details of specific instrument choices, specific harmonic choices, and with all Grainger folk song things, it's the variation from melodic. You hear the melody right away in each of these, but then once you get past that, it's the variation that's where all the good stuff is, and that, to my ear or my eye as well, is all driven by the stories.
Yeah.
And so, back to your question, David, if you know that, then it helps you to rehearse. Not so much telling the stories all the time, but this is why Grainger did this. This is what's happening. And you can isolate things in such a way that, so for example, that bump, bump, that's basically gypsy music. So who stole a young lady? 3 gypsies, they stole me and took me away. So, once you get the tambourine in that, and
Right.
why do you put it in the horns, the hardest instrument in the band to do that with? Who knows? But, that's kind of how it all wraps up.
I love that. It's fantastic.
So then, just to take a step back about, the story you told about Dionysiacs and the person asking you about changing the performance practice, or there are times where a composer's score is very detailed, and so how do you navigate honoring a composer's intent while still allowing space for your own musical voice?
Well, I think there's so many different ways to answer that, but I'll give it my best shot. I recorded 10 commercial CDs at Michigan, and we have this thriving YouTube channel. And my goals in doing that was to archive primary sources. So we did a lot of pieces that, were not Michigan commissions or whatever, but there was a huge chunk of those, and where the composer was involved in the process of not only writing the piece in rehearsals, but in the recording process. So anybody who wants to know how Bill Bolcom wanted the symphony, here you go. Michael Daugherty, here you go. And I felt that was really important, because we only have conjecture about Mozart and Beethoven. We have, lots of writings from various people at the time. And there's this terrific book by a guy named Clyde Brown about performance practice in that harmony music era. But you have to absorb that information and then process it into your own. And I think what enough people don't do is look at the information in the score and think about it practically. So if I'm in a space that's really boomy and the composer says 176, I can go 168 or 164, and the audience is going to feel like it's 176. If I go into a space that's very dry and the composer said 60, I may have to go 68 or 72 to create the same feeling. And I'll never forget Don Hunsberger telling a bunch of us at a conducting workshop in the early 80s, if I get a brand new score from one of the Michigan Eastman faculty members, and they have a tempo, I tell them I'm going to take 8 down or 8 up, depending on how this goes. And you got to live with that. So I think the MIDI has been a really bad thing for interpretation, because people get MIDIs, composers get stuck on the MIDI tempo. But I've never met a band yet that is inhumane as a MIDI. So you have to be real about it. And, Stravinsky famously said, well, there is no interpretation in my music. It's all, blah, blah, blah. Then you listen to him to conduct the octave
Right.
3 ways, and it's different every time. People, want to look at Hindemith like, he's part of the Munsters or something. But if you watch him conduct the Chicago Symphony, he adds traditional classical expression to things. So if you want to go yum da dum da dum da 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 dum da da dum, you can do that. That's what the score says. But if you want to go da dum da dum da dum da ya da 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 dum, that's okay too, because that's kind of how Hindemith, Schoenberg too, how they would have done it, because they had the intuition that people would come from Vienna like they did,
Right?
And and have that same background. So listening to lots of pieces outside the band pieces you're doing by those composers, and if there's not pieces in other genres, that might tell you something. Listening to people sing, like taking one of the things I learned most from Bob Reynolds a long time ago at this conducting workshop I did with him in 1980, is we had a score to a Strauss art song, and he played 2 or 3 different singers doing it, and just asked us to track what the difference was. They were all great, but they were different. And I think when we try to imitate as opposed to interpret, I think the imitation track keeps you thinking inside about what somebody else did. If you develop this interpretation idea that I was talking about earlier, the why does it need to sound this way, then I think it's much easier to be authentically yourself, artistically. I don't think people should do things that are like stylistic way out of bounds. But I also don't think people should be changed to the fence post of how it's always been done. I remember I did a performance of the entire Symphonic Metamorphosis in 2014 or something like that. And I decided that I was going to try really emphasizing the original piano pieces in the way I brought this to life, which meant, in my mind, that there was a greater continuity as opposed to everybody just waiting for the march. So, we did it. The performance is really good. It's still up on YouTube, and you see these comments, well, the march is too slow. Okay. The march is slower than it usually is, but who defines too slow? And, it's the same thing with Rocky Point Holiday. I mean, I hear people do Rocky Point Holiday, and you can't hear anything except noise because it's just so fast. And, did Rocky Point Holiday a little slower in the cavernous space of Hill Auditorium? Way too slow. What's he thinking about? That sort of stuff. Which is, people have the right to express their opinion. But, you just learn, I think, to be independently artistic. And, I think turning off other people's recordings, not watching all the time on YouTube when you're in the midst of studying something and trying to coming up with your own point of view. And I keep coming back to that phrase, point of view. That's where the interpretation is. I mean, Bob Reynolds would say, how do you feel about the music? He wasn't talking about if you liked it. He wasn't talking about if they were in tune or together. He was talking about, how do you want this to go? And he would say to people, in the Reynolds Conducting Institute of Midwest, I don't know how you feel about the music. And what he was really saying is, what's your point of view here? If you got one, you're not showing it.
Yeah, that's very true. We're running short on time, so I'm going to jump to just a broad question for our listeners. And it's thinking from just a point of advice, for young conductors or individuals that are trying to build a meaningful program, a lasting program and career, what would broad advice, would you provide?
Well, I mean, this sounds cliche, but keep the main thing the main thing. Why did you get into doing this? Why are you teaching? Was it competition? If that's so, go for it. But if it was music and playing and, the love of the instrument that got you into this, then keep focusing on that. I find, and the other thing is, go back to this Maya Angelou quote. How do you make people feel when you're pursuing what you think is your artistic goals? And if people are feeling bad and dropping out and parents are in an uproar, maybe you take a deep breath. And I know it's there's a vision and a standard and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not talking about diminishing the hopes and dreams of what can be accomplished either individually or for your program, but how do you get there? And I've always been a person who thought about process leading to product, not product only product, because I think, in my experience of observing people for all those years in Texas and, colleagues in the universities and out and about, people who are only focused on the product, but not focused on the process tend to get into more trouble. And one of the things I always said to the symphony band is that this is a laboratory of professionalism. You can learn to be professional without getting paid. You can get paid in a situation that's not very professional. So what does it take to be professional? Now, if you're in an 8th grade band, what is this a laboratory of? It may not be a laboratory of professionalism, but is it a laboratory of experiencing music? Or is it a laboratory of making a one-hit festival? Why are we here? And that's what I mean by the main thing.
Right. I love that.
So Michael, here is the part of the podcast where we ask all of our guests a couple standing questions. So I'll take the first. Okay. Do you have a soapbox topic? And it can be about anything. It can be about music, conducting, life.
Soapbox topic. Okay, let me see. It'd be easy to be political, and I'll refrain from that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is partly related to all we've been talking about. And when I say keep the main thing, and I told you earlier, I've been married for 50 years, and I've had a partner in life who's been willing to, make the sacrifices to move here and move there and all that sort of stuff, but also really helped keep me grounded. Just being able to balance the demands of the job with the opportunities for the family life and being home for dinner, all those sorts of things that, when we had our kids are now 46 and 42, I would just encourage everybody who's involved in band that they're not curing cancer. We're not doing brain surgery. Try to be as invested in the quality of your personal life as you are in the quality of your professional life.
That's great advice. It's very interesting. We've had a couple of mental health professionals on the podcast, and that's been a theme. And every one of them was more mental health, one was more physical health, that kind of aligned with mental health. It was about taking care of yourself and finding time for yourself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely.
And maybe not on social media.
Not there. So, second question, is there a particular book or books that have inspired you in your journey? Again, it doesn't have to be musical. It can just be something that you'd share with our listeners.
Yeah, there's a sort of a topic, I would say. I am, because of a history teacher I had in a survey course on American history at East Carolina University, I've long become a student of American history and presidential politics, which, makes the current situation a little bit rough. So I've read a lot of biographies. I read a lot of military history. I've read a lot of social histories of conditions, of what people did and how they had to deal with things. And it always makes me feel grateful for what we have. You know, I'm grateful to be living in this particular point in time, no matter how difficult it may seem in some ways. What we have with technology, what we have with transportation, what we have with food sources. You know, if you read some of the things that the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, you know, World War I, World War II, you know, it's just the things that people have sacrificed for us to have what we have now. That's a little bit of a soapbox, but it's also you know, something that I have enjoyed reading over the years because of this teacher I had who inspired me so at East Carolina. And I've read more books in the last 3 years being retired than I probably did in the 10 years before that because I have time.
Right.
So I think, you know, going back to the whole balance thing, the soapbox issue, I think if you have interest, whether it's, you know, a certain kind of exercise, a certain kind of sport, or a certain kind of reading, and you know, I also love to read murder mysteries. So I've read, you know, books by a woman named Tara French. I've read all the Robert Galbraith books, who's the, you know, a pen name of J.K. Rowling, or the Cormoran Strike novels. And I've read novels by this Icelandic murder mystery writer. I wish I could pronounce his name, but it looks like an eye chart. Because we went to Iceland on vacation back in the fall, and I found out about them. So I'm just constantly trying to read things that both interest and entertain me, but also then continue to educate me. A lot of biographies. You know, we went to Italy. I came back and read biographies of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and so many of the other, you know, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. Just trying to find out what it's been like to live on this planet all these years.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I got to be honest. I did not have a good history teacher, and I took history 4 times before I finally got out of it in my undergrad. I dropped it 3 times.
Wow.
In my senior year, I had a TA, and I went in and said, "Look, man, I have to graduate. I'm private teaching 65 students. I teach the marching band. There's a lot of things I was doing. I just need a C. Can we work something out here?" Like, I literally got to that point. And I regret that because now looking back, I enjoy reading historical novels, especially even if it's fiction, a historical fiction that's based around truth.
Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah.
But in undergrad, that one experience, like my first, well, it started in high school when we had coaches that were teaching U.S. history, and they'd rather be at a baseball field than talking to us. Yeah. So I just never fell in love with it. I wish that was an opportunity. I still look back and go, I wish I had read more, because you're right. It does inform kind of where we are. If you can say, I'm grateful for this because.
So there's another, let me tell one more story. Because I brought this up, this teacher is a guy named Willard Still. And I was in this 100-person, you know, big survey class. And the guy walks in and he says, "You have an assigned seat. Somebody will check the roll. If you're here, fine. I'm not going to waste your time calling the roll. And we're going to start here. We're going to go there." And he would walk in every class and he'd just start telling stories. It felt like he was sitting with grandpa on the front porch. And I was enamored by the content. He made it feel like we were actually watching a movie or something, watching a historical reenactment. And I thought, I want to teach like that guy. He never used notes. He looked everybody in the eye. He was there early, talked to people. And those are all things that weren't not unique to my experience as an undergrad, but his ability to hold the room with that style was different than 20 people in a theory class or whatever.
Right.
So I learned a lot by that, and I tried to be able to then recall that and build on that when I had to get up in front and talk to large groups of people and all that sort of stuff. Try to read the room and hold it was the way I would phrase it. So 20 years later, I was back on campus to get this alumni award, and the person who was my host said, "Is there anything you want to do?" And I said, "Yeah. Do you know if this guy named Willard Still is still around?" And she goes, "Have no idea, but I'll check." So she came back to me a little bit later and said, "This is his last semester. You can see you tomorrow at 1:00. So
that's awesome.
This guy didn't know me from Adam. I was in his, the 4th row of his class 20 years ago.
Right.
So I went over to his office and I went in and, we exchanged, hello, how are you? And I explained to him how I had interacted with him. And I told him, how much his instruction had meant to me, both as a teacher and the things I tried to pick up and take away from that, but also my adult life history. That's been 32 years ago.
Right.
And so we had a very nice chat for about a half an hour, and then I had to go do a rehearsal. So I was ready to take my leave. And he said, I really appreciate you coming by. It means a lot to me. And he said, you're young. You have a lot of years left. Don't ever forget, today might be the day the light bulb goes off for that student. And I've thought about that so many times, whether it's, in the symphony band or in a graduate conducting seminar or class or, doing a workshop or something. You never know when somebody's going to go, oh. He said, teach every day with missionary zeal, because you never know when the light bulb's going to go off. And, that was to me a calling. And that's what I try to do.
I think that's arguably the best answer we've ever had to that question.
Ever. Which makes this upcoming question seem a little trivial after that, because that's a good one. But so we always end with this question, Michael, which is arguably the most important. But what's your favorite time signature?
Well, that there is a time signature is one. I think, like a lot of people, I probably had the most practice at 4/4.
We like that one.
Well, that's the right answer. That's why we call it comma time. Oh, that's fantastic. We've had a lot of different answers, but hardly anyone. We've had about 2 people say comma time or 4/4. So you're one of a small group, but I think it's an elite group.
Yeah. So, 2/4 is a little easier on the body, but
That's true.
That's so funny.
Well, Professor Haithcock, it has been a pleasure and just an honor to have you on and sharing with us as well as our listeners. But I've learned an immense amount today. I'm doing symphonic metamorphosis in April, and I'm already thinking about tempo and the 4th movement being what people think about. Like, we got these other 3 movements, so you've even given me some things to dig deeper in.
Well, you can go on the Symphony Band YouTube channel and listen to my 2 slow march.
But I can see why you did it based on where it came from. It's
And the truth is, how many people actually know where those tunes came from?
Yeah,
that's the sad point.
Yeah.
Why is it like this? Well, you mean that was piano music? I've had it. Yeah, that was piano music. And
it was piano music.
Read the research where Wilson, who did the transcription, interacted with Hindemith, and there's just all these
right. That whole why question is just really good. I'm glad that came up today. That's so important.
Yep.
And I think, I fall into this trap sometimes based on time constraints and the number of rehearsals I have, having stepped on the podium, not unprepared, but not the most prepared. Like you mentioned even at the very beginning about it's good, but could it be better? What's the best it can be? It's a constant challenge, I think, for all of us, whether we're 8th grade band or doing a college ensemble. So I appreciate that coming into play today. But again, thank you so much for your time. We're honored.
Thank you so much, Michael. Yeah.
It was really my pleasure, and good luck to you all.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks for spending part of your day with us on the Common Time Podcast. If today's conversation gave you something to think about or something to try with your students, we'd love for you to share this episode with a colleague.
And you can also follow us on social media for episode clips, behind-the-scenes content, and updates to our upcoming guests. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode.
Until next time, keep making music and keep making a difference.